All right. So let's jump into Messenger of Peace preview number 3, the No Mercy stream getting kicked off here, and obviously we've got a great start with the Summon Ruby Cobra. Summon Ruby Cobra is a ready spell. It's got a main action, no dice tax, book tax to play this guy. It's a main action and exhaust in one charm class. Place a Ruby Cobra conjuration on your battlefield.
It's a charm power.
Charm power, right? Yeah. You're right. I said charm class. That's my bad.
Obviously, you need the snake to summon the snake.
Right, just like Silver Snake, a tool for befuddling those who would befuddle. That's cool text, cool flavor text. The Ruby Cobra is obviously where we get into this. Conjuration count of 3, so you can have up to 3 of these on your battlefield. It's got an ability Intimidate when this unit is declared as an attacker, add 1 to its attack value for the remainder of turn. Then choose a target opponent to discard 1 card off the top of their draw pile. Charming, this unit cannot be targeted by attacks from units with a charm die on them. All right, so that's a lot to unpack, Neil.
Well, I mean, kind of. I think the second text is like 2% of the time that's ever going to matter.
I think you're right.
Because like that's a cool ability, and it's like very flavorful.
Right.
So from like a design point of view, I think it's very cool. But from an actual gameplay point of view, like I don't know how often, like, you see the charm power so rarely already, and it is good, and it does happen sometimes, but it's usually just to like gain yourself 1 life. If this was a bigger unit, like something you put a lot of time and resources into, and you actually wanted to protect, then that ability would be a lot more relevant. But like, I just don't know how often you like care if they attack your O2 anyway.
You know, I wonder if this is. I mean, is this the kind of card that has the possibility of including Royal Charm? Like decks with Ruby Cobras and Royal Charms? Is that going to be a card? Is that going to be a card we're going to see a lot more of?
It's probably fine. I think saying we're going to see a lot more of it is, well, so Cobra aside, like not considering Cobra as anything other than an additional charm card. Like, yes, charm gains some value from this expansion simply because there's 8 new charm cards. So if you're more likely to play charm, you're more likely to play Royal Charm.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, like the kind of deck that wants a Royal Charm doesn't seem like it overlaps very much with the Ruby Cobra deck.
Mm-hmm.
Because the decks that traditionally have wanted Royal Charm are like triple Night Start kind of things, like they use all your dice on expensive stuff, so you like need something free to do to gain a little bit of value. And Ruby Cobra being very efficient and cheap doesn't fall into that category really. So I guess if there's like we can talk about this a little more after we preview the next card.
Sure.
Because I think it's much more like relevant to that than it is to this.
Yeah. I just wonder, like, so Royal Charm turns this into a conjuration that costs you essentially 0. I mean, because you can go ahead and charm. You can spend.
I wouldn't count charm power dice as the value of an entire dice. So I don't know that it's 0, but I mean, obviously things that already require a snake, you get to put it on the Royal Charm for a little bit of value.
Right.
But unless you're using up your whole turn, or I guess like have a really big spell board and you just like want a little bit of value.
Mm-hmm.
I think Royal Charm is pretty low impact.
Ben coming in with a 4 card setup with Gates, Royal Charm, Nightshade, and Cobra. So get double Cobra, double Nightshade, and get double Royal Charm.
So that's 6, 7.
7 dice.
So is there a book tax on one of these that I don't know about?
No. Nightshade and Cobra both don't have book taxes. Royal Charm has no book tax.
So that's 6 in summons, 1 in gates is 7.
Yep.
So that's only 7 dice.
Yeah. So you'd have a pretty good. You still have the opportunity to do something pretty powerful with those last
I
three
guess
dice.
it could be like Night Blitz those things, but I don't know. It seems like we're working pretty hard to put a rail charm in play, and it's just not that impactful.
Yeah, I think there's value in it when you get the free activation off of Royal Charm, and
There's only value in that if you are out of dice already and you have an additional like card in your first 5.
Sure,
that's like the only time that there's value.
Maybe I'm not sure I agree completely with that analysis, but
so let's use the one that you just said, the 4 that Ben said.
Yeah.
So you have enough dice that you could play Strength in, which gives you a bigger pump than Royal Charm, and you get to use it twice, and it continues to be good for the remainder of the game.
Ben says swap the Nightshade for Frostback.
and in that case, you still have room for Strengthen.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ben says and Strengthen his last card. So yeah, we're on the same page with that, Ben. I think those are kind of powerful openings. I think it's aggressive for Charm, which I think is nice.
The Royal Charm, if you're playing only the Charm half, is not aggressive. It's extremely defensive.
Sure.
Because obviously the half that pumps the power of your guys is the divine half, not
right.
Anyway.
I do like this. I also think that with the rise of a lot of 2-life units, I do wonder how much Saria comes into her own a little bit here in this new meta with Cobras and Shepherds and those kinds of things. And Carl's adding to this conversation saying Charming is extremely niche, but it can stop a Knight Destroy effect if other units are too big for the Knight to destroy. Stop Sonic. Yeah, I think those are the kinds of things that make it interesting, Carl. And I think
right. So in that case, then we're talking about like a card that you have a 1 of in your pile as a potential first 5 option in certain cases.
Sure.
Rather than like actually planning on actively using it.
I mean, the one benefit of Royal Charm, though, to be totally fair, is that it doesn't cost you anything, right? It's completely free all the time.
Well, it costs you a card in it.
Sure.
Right. So, and it's normally going to cost you a first 5 card.
Sure.
Because it's not the kind of card that you just want to
draw
jam 3 of in your pile and draw into. Because if even like let's say that I put 3 of them in play for some reason, like I still only get to activate 1 per power dice that I've spent.
Right.
It doesn't like double up or anything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not even great in multiples. I don't know. I do find the card interesting. I actually like had it in a list that I built recently, but it actually, it didn't have any charm cards in it. It was playing it because I was on 10 dice, 4 cards. And it was like a free thing that you could do because I had divine dice.
Right. And I do think it's still best, obviously, on the divine side. It's much more aggressive on the divine side. But I do think that there is some potential play here with this Cobra, this snake.
So
Cam
the next card makes it much more interesting.
Yeah. And Cam is adding, he thinks that the Ruby Cobra is the best amplify target. And then, later on focusing the Mind Fog. I don't disagree, Cam. I think that that's an interesting place to be as well. But I don't know if focusing Mind Fog is worth the effort versus just what we were talking about with Royal Charm, if that's what your plan is. This is just
what is the focus on Mind Fog?
It just says if you spend a snake die to activate the Mind Fog Owl, instead you get to resolve the snake power without paying its cost.
Oh. Okay. Well, again, that has more to do with the next card than this card.
Right. The mill effect is definitely, obviously, Carl, where this is just living, right? Like, it's just living as a mill card. But
this is like fourth. Like, I had the pleasure of playing against this with Carl like a day before it came out or whatever. I had like the smallest amount of pre-knowledge. Just as like a for fun game after we had our round 1 match. And this card was really interesting to me. Like, it's essentially a 1/2, which I think for the current state of the game is much better than a 2/1, which we have in a lot of colors.
Right.
We have like the 1 dice 2/1, the 1 dice 1/1 in a lot of colors. But having the 2 life makes it way different.
Agreed.
Because, you shy away from cards like Ancestor Spirit or Shadow Spirit or whatever, because you don't want to get natured out of the game. But you can't do that to this. I mean, I think that the addition of, I mean, we've added 3 0-2s for 1, right?
Right.
In these 2 expansions. So I think that makes Odette better. She was already good. I think it makes Aerodol better. She was already good. I think it makes Law of Fear like playable.
Yep.
It was already kind of playable, but like it's very effective against cards like this and Lizard. Even if they have the Shepherd and you can't like target their thing with the exhaustion token, like these cards don't attack through the law very easily.
Right. Nope, they don't at all. So
but when I was playing with Carl, like he had Cobra and Lizard both. And I ended up always killing the Lizard because I thought that was much more dangerous. I still think that's correct. But the Cobra is like a 1/2 is surprisingly resilient. And like he said, the mill, like he got me for 4 cards or whatever over the course of the game in a deck that wasn't a mill deck. Like this can be a fine attacker as an efficient man in a pressure style deck, or it can be like 4th copy of
Orchid Dove. Right. But it's much more proactive than the Orchid Dove, right? That has to be destroyed somehow. So
yeah, kind of. The thing about that is that the mill decks usually play much more defensive. So the Orchid Dove's like I think you would prefer the guy that can sit there and block and do it rather than the guy that has to attack to do it.
Sure.
But it's still pretty close because you can make the choice not to block,
right,
and like mill them, or you can still make the choice to block.
Kim, I'd say a 1/2 unit guard would be bonkers in Reborn. I think it'd be easily one of the best units in the game. So I can see how
depending on its cost, but yeah.
I can see how I can see how Gilder in 1.0 would be very, very good because of the 1/2 in unit guard. But I still think 1/2 unit guard in Reborn would just be out of bounds as well.
Yeah, and honestly, like it is now in the current state of the game, but after these 2 expansions are released, it might not be. Because the difference between 0 and 1 is really big when we're talking about all these units that it could block and kill that have 1 life.
Right.
But when we're shifting to even the cheap units all have 2 life, then the 1 power on the blocker is a lot less important.
Right.
Because like as a 1/2, Gilder would not trade with Lizard by itself, right? Well, assuming the Lizard has a counter.
Yeah, if the Lizard has a counter, then the Gilder dies to the Lizard in that scenario. But
yeah, so I think this card is not super exciting, but I think it's really efficient, and like it makes wide book decks like good. You know, like all the 4 book decks are essentially like 1 2-dice summon or 2 2-dice summons and then some little guys, and we're getting just this influx of these little guys that I think are all good.
So Cam, here's what I'll say about Steadfast. I keep eyeballing Steadfast a lot, especially when we're seeing Charm start to come into its own here with Auric being a support to that and really printing some really great Charm cards. And I do think the Steadfast Guardian has a place. At 2 dice to spend on it, a 1/3 unit guard alert is not a bad rate.
The biggest downside is that you only get 1.
Right.
Like for a 2-dice summon, you want to have at least 2 so that you can like activate it twice.
Right.
But as a 1 of conjuration, it's more like an ally than it is like a.
And I will agree with that statement. I have not played it a lot in practice, so this is just theory. I do think that the focus is interesting, but I don't know whether or not it's necessary. Like I'm not sure I think it might be a trap to focus.
What is the focus? It like heals it or something?
Yeah, it just says for the you can replay your Steadfast Guardian or remove all wound tokens and exhaustion tokens from it. So I think that's okay on a whole, but I mean Steadfast Guardian looks a little sad into Turtle, right? Turtle's sort of.
I also think that the printing of Sunshield makes Steadfast look kind of.
Sunshield's very interesting too. So let's move on to Captivate here. Captivate is a ready spell. It has a charm class to play in a main action. It says when this spell comes into play, you may destroy a target exhausted unit with a charm die on it. As a side action in exhaust, choose a target unit. That unit cannot be declared as an attacker until the start of your next turn or the next round. This is really interesting that they added the next round clause. I wonder if that's just for clarity, because we have like what is that safeguard that doesn't say the next round? I don't think. I think safeguard just specifically says till the start of your next turn, and then it got a bunch of FAQs regarding how the next turn could pass into the next round. So I just wonder if this is just a clarity thing that they added this extra text to the next round.
This is the fixed version of safeguard. The other safeguard is kind of nonsense, where you like can take away their top round swing. And they didn't want Captivate to do that,
right?
So.
I do think this is yet another powerful tool for dealing with individually large threats. It obviously is not super great against.
It's only good if you have a way, like it buys you one turn to deal with it, right? So You have to have a way to deal with it. But the first half of it's very relevant. This is like somewhere between Fester and Two Shadows.
Yeah. So the interesting. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Because it requires, Fester is essentially the card says kill target unit if for the cost of nature power and ceremonial power. So this is saying Two Shadows something at the cost of charm class plus charm power.
Right.
It also has flexible mode of just play it normal, do not get to come into playability, and then activate a side action. But I think most of the time this card is not worth it unless you get the destroy off.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is an interesting card because it does have some natural synergy to countering Lightbringer. You can play this as a one of two. Because a lot of times in Lightbringer plays, people play Lightbringer into your one unit. And you can actually go ahead and, if you have Captivate down, even if you don't have Captivate down, play Captivate into target that unit and it cannot attack.
You have to have Captivate in play already because you can't use your main action to play it if they've Lightbringered you.
Sure. You do have to have the Captivate down. So it does sort of shut off Lightbringer as a single one unit target.
I think that is, not good to do normally because you're trading more of your action for the Lightbringer, but there are cases where I guess it's disastrous for you to attack into it, so you don't want to.
Right.
But most of the time, I think this is a removal spell, and it's a good one. 2 dice kill anything, even though it has the exhausted clause. It's kind of like a 2 dice, 2 shadows or a 2 dice fade away kind of thing.
So Cam says Lightbringer counter, Lightbringer to force Owl, and you Captivate Draenor anyway. Yeah,
that is assuming you don't have another unit in play because
right.
If the Owl's your only unit, then yeah, that works. But
so the only issue I would see with the Owl counter is this is a lot of setup because you set up the Owl book, set up Captivate, summon Owl. Now the Lightbringer gets played. Now you can play, and your opponent's probably not going to play Lightbringer into a Captivate, right? And so maybe that's a win.
Well, I mean. It's their prerogative, right? Because they may think that Captivate, if you're on the board of only Owl and Captivate, and they Lightbringer you, obviously it's on board, so they're making the decision that that's fine with them, that you can activate your Captivate and still make them discard.
Right.
Because presumably they have some larger unit that they want to make sure gets an attack in and doesn't get Captivated.
Absolutely.
So it kind of I think that the good half of this spell is to come into playability, and the rest of it is get a little bit of advantage where you can. It has some weird stuff, right? This is a unique ability.
It's very unique.
Obviously it may be powerful.
Yeah, I think this is potentially to me it's a wait and see card. I'm going to need somebody that's much better at Ashes than me to
because
show
it
me
doesn't
power.
Because it can't stop the top of round big swing. It's it's really, really niche. You have to work pretty hard to envision yourself using this in a very productive way, because a lot of time all it's going to do is be okay, well, right now I'm vulnerable to swordsman attack or whatever,
right?
So you can't attack with it. I play something that presumably I will be able to use the following turn to kill the swordsman before it gets to attack.
Right.
You know, like it can't. If you already have the thing in play, Captivate doesn't do anything. If you don't have a thing to do with it, Captivate doesn't do anything.
Right.
And the biggest thing that when I first read this, I thought it worked like Safeguard, and I was like, oh well, this makes like snake decks and big unit decks like really bad, but because this is like it would leave you in a situation where you don't have to safeguard to always get the top of round meal, regardless if you're the first player or not.
It is interesting that this potentially does hurt the Silver Snake a little bit, right? Because if you get to that point, like we see it a lot in Silver Snake games where not necessarily the Silver Snake that's on Hypnotize, but just the standard Silver Snake game, where it just sort of whittles you down to no units in play. And then it's out of like actions to clear your board, but it no longer needs to because it's cleared your board, and so that's got free swings. And Captivate just says, no, can't attack.
Yeah, it's the same thing as
it's
the same thing as any big unit. Like I was using the swordsman example. Like it's the same as that, where as a side action you buy yourself an additional main action to deal with the threat.
Right.
So if you can do it in two mains and not one, then it's good. If not, then it's not.
Right.
But to your point from earlier, when you're talking about Royal Charm, like the first half of this spell is something that like very much would make me want to activate a Royal Charm for snake power.
Right.
I think a lot of times even that hoop is too much and you're just okay like spending your charm dice most of the time.
Right.
But if you are like a dice heavy deck and you can cheat one out with the Royal Charm, like Captivate is a reason to do it.
I wonder, like, in specific, I mean, I'd love to have been a fly on the wall during the testing of this card, and I know that Nick has talked about how difficult Auric was to get right, but I wonder if a version of this card at one point didn't have the exhausted unit component. Because it feels like...
That's going to be bonkers.
Well, right, but it's really telegraphed, right? Because it's sitting on your spell board.
No. It's when it comes into play for your hand to destroy something, so it's just Sword of Virtue then.
Sure, yeah.
Like, it's just Sword of Virtue that costs only charm base.
Sure, yeah.
That would be something else.
So we'll see. I'm curious about this card. I think it will make it into decks early on, and I think that its potential that it might bubble up in tournaments. I think we're going to see
having a this is kind of funny that having a reliable removal spell like this in Charm, I think actually makes Illusion like much less playable.
Yeah, it unfortunately it does hurt Illusion a lot.
Like the two things that I always wanted to play from Illusion are Two Shadows and Fade Away, and Captivate is very similar to that.
It's very, very, very similar for sure. All right, so let's move on to Generosity. Generosity is
the strangest card and the card that I think is so awesome.
I think this card is sweet, dude. So Generosity is an action spell. It has a main and a side cost, parallel costs of either Charm class or Time class. And for anybody that's new to Ashes, just remember that on parallel costs, you pay one or the other. You don't have to pay both. So I know that's a mix-up that a lot of people get, but this is good to know. And this is a modal card. So this is resolve one of the effects listed below. Choose a target opponent to resolve a different effect of their choice. Then resolve the last unchosen effect. So the first effect that can be chosen is remove one exhaustion token from your Phoenixborn or a ready spell you control. The second one is remove 2 wound tokens from your Phoenixborn or a unit you control. And the last one is draw 3 cards. This card is wild. And the reason why it's wild is...
I don't know that it's actually very good because it takes main and side.
Yeah.
That's like its biggest downfall. But yeah, like you said, it's weird. So it's already a card that like we've never seen one like before. Obviously, we've had some cards that are player choice, but it's usually like opponent choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't, how many modal cards have we had?
I don't think there's any.
Like, I think it's the first modal cards that are functionally modal.
Yeah.
But like don't actually say that on the card like this. But one unique thing about this card is that it's the only card besides Consume Soul that readies a Phoenixborn.
Right.
Obviously, it's one of like 4 cards that readies a
unit
ready spell.
Right.
the heal too is meh. It's whatever, right? Like
Right.
sometimes you'll want that, but I mean,
yeah, Enlightenment does ready a Phoenixborn as well. We always forget about Enlightenment in that conversation.
What does that card do?
It's just it's a divine class and a basic, and it removes an exhaustion token from a card in the game. You can pick any card and remove it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought it missed Phoenixborns, but
nope, it hits any.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is a lot better than that.
Yes.
It costs 1 dice.
It costs 1 dice. I think that if you're playing Generosity, most likely you're on option 1.
Right. Like you're almost always picking option 1 unless you're Cole and then you're picking option 3.
Right. I mean, if anybody wants option 3 first, it's Cole. The interesting thing about it is, like, I played a test match with Carl today after these cards have been spoiled, and he played a Generosity on me twice. And the first time, like, I was playing such a dice-efficient deck that I just took the draw 3. And it actually worked out pretty well in my favor to do that. But it did advance his win con, because his win con was an abundance mill, right, in that play. And I knew the first time I did it. The second time, I decided I didn't need any more card advantage, so I literally took the remove 2 wound tokens from your Phoenixborn, and that was only to prevent him from healing. And because he was trying to extend his life pool through healing while milling me. And I mean, I'm going to tell you, like, Abundance combined with Generosity and drawing 3 cards when you're trying to set up Abundance, it works pretty well. I'm not going to lie. It works pretty well. I think that this is such a wild and weird card because you don't know what you're going to get for your 1 die, right? You know one thing you're going to get for your 1 die.
Right. So this card, unlike the other player choice cards, because it gives you the choice, is much better. You're always going to get the thing that you want, right? So, like you said, option 1 is what you're in for most times, because that's a unique effect and it's a powerful effect, whether you pick the Phoenixborn or Ready spell.
Right.
The other modes are, essentially like, okay, like it's like each of the 3 things is like 3/4 of a card, right? Like, and so you end up with a card and a half to your opponent's, like, not a whole card, and it makes up the difference. And this operates in a space of the game that not a lot of cards operate. I think Abundance is like one of the things,
right?
But more often, even, I think, like, when you just think about this card, you think about possible game states that exist. It's really easy to engineer one in your head where, like, you're like, okay, I have, I don't know, simple, like, an Odette, and I reset my Enter the Fray.
Right.
I'm just okay with doing either of the other 2 things. And if I wasn't okay with my opponent doing one of the other 2 things, I had the choice not to play the spell.
Right. So the thing I think is interesting about it, I think that some of the really good Phoenixborns, like Odette and Herald and Echo to a lesser extent, and Aerodel, all love this card. For the untap a Phoenixborn for 1 die, right? Like,
essentially any of the, like you said, all the good ones, and then all the ones with abilities that are cheap or free.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you could definitely, like, see yourself, like, okay, I choose draw 3, and my opponent chooses gain 2, so I, like, get an extra ice buff or something, like,
right? Yeah.
Where, like, that's not the peak that you're doing, but it's still good. Like, so any of the ones that are free, even like Auric, I assume that this is in his deck, since it's a Charm Time card, like, you could have drawn a card off Auric earlier, and you can then draw another card off Auric after this. Yeah. Having done one of the other things.
It definitely can advance the Awakened state if that ever becomes a thing. Right? If Awakened state can be a thing, it advances the Awakened state. It costs you a ton of dice. And that's the issue with it.
It only costs you, each concentration is 1 dice, right?
Right.
So,
but you got to play Generosity for 1 dice, and then you play 2 concentrations, so you've spent 3 of your 10 dice to get 2 counters on Auric. That's pretty expensive.
Well, it's just, each instance of it that you described is just 1 dice for 1 counter.
Sure.
Like, so I think it's fine to do that.
Yep.
I don't know that the Auric deck actually wants generosity because he shouldn't be starved for cards, and probably isn't starved for life.
Yeah.
Because you're playing a very defensive deck, but assuming you're trying to awaken. But I don't know. I mean, in order to do the awaken state thing, you have to have 2 of them going at least anyway.
Right.
Because of the printing of Recollect, I don't know that it's like I don't know that it's necessary to go to like generosity as your 4th copy of concentration.
Yeah, it's an interesting set of examples. I think if there's a card that, like we've said this about Accelerate, and I don't think we've seen the ceiling on Accelerate yet, but I think this is another one of those cards that could potentially be backbreaking in the right builds, and it does powerful things for efficient costs. So traditionally, that's been a recipe for good competitive cards.
Yeah, the problem with generosity is that none of the 3 effects by themselves are particularly powerful or unique. The remove an exhaustion for your Phoenixborn, obviously we talked about as being not common, but in general, you're not going to get an ability that's not worth more than 1 dice. You're not like resetting some nonsense like super thing,
right?
And resetting a ready spell, like we have Fiona, who has not proven herself yet. We have Gates, which Gates is good because it creates so much card advantage off readying multiple ones.
Right.
You know, remove 2 wounds, we have 10 different versions of. Some of them are played, some of them aren't. And draw 3, like, there's aren't a lot of decks that want to draw 3 cards.
Well, it definitely makes sleight of hand feel really, really poor, right? Like, you're never going to
kind of. I mean, the problem with that card is that it costs illusion.
Right.
Like, and the other problem with that card is that the card Abundance exists.
Right.
Which is, like, the same cost and draws 1 less, but then it, like, for free draws you a bunch more over the course of the game.
Right. Abundance is always going to be worth, probably somewhere around 6 cards per Abundance.
I mean, you should take into the calculation, like the difference in actual cards deployed versus your opponent to see if it's better than the 3-for-1 of sleight of hand. But yeah, I mean, this card is cool. I think specifically you're talking about Accelerate. I think Accelerate is something that you can do with this card because much like Meteor, you get the Accelerate like backs you up another action for the turn after doing this.
Right.
And if you're going real deep, it's like a deck like that probably wants to draw 3 cards, so you can start like going kind of bonkers and like Accelerate, play Generosity, ready a ready spell. Your opponent gains 2, you draw 3. Like draw 2nd Accelerate because you drew 3 cards. Play Accelerate, have 2 more side actions.
Right. It's just a question of what you do with all of it when you're done, right?
Right, and it's usually not very much because you've taken your main action.
Yeah, I do think that this kind of card potentially with explosive growth and exhortation and Accelerate, like the draw 3 just helps you set that up better. It's pretty efficient. It's on color. So between Accelerate and Generosity and chaining those things, you can get into the possibility of like, Accelerate, Generosity, set up explosive growth, exhortation, and go.
You can't play exhortation in round 1, so.
Right. No. I'm not talking about round 1. I'm just talking about like a mid game, like you just need a single Generosity potentially to trigger it all.
Yeah, it's just rough that it takes your main action. Like I don't know if this card actually goes anywhere. This feels like it's like a one of in a lot of decks, or like Carl was playing it, I assume to untap the Abundance.
Yeah, that's what he mostly did was using untap Abundance.
And then it forces you to like decide if you want to like Abundance yourself faster or like possibly like heal for nothing.
Right, and that's what ended up doing on the second Generosity played with me on that game is I took the remove 2 wound tokens from the Phoenixborn or unit for 0. because it was better than me digging 3 more cards for abundance turn-ons. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think this card's very cool. I don't know that it slots in anywhere yet, but
So,
it's definitely a sweet one.
It is neat. It is neat, and I do think it's got a lot of potential. I just don't know what that potential is yet. And I do kind of like that we got Lulu and Goran Rock here chilling with Auric and the Flock Shepherd. So I think
it reminds me of. I mean, this is a little different, but they printed a Magic card. I don't know, like 5 years ago or something now, probably. That it was an enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. You like had to do one of the things it hadn't done yet of a list of 4 things, and the last one was lose the game. So like it was like these 3 extremely powerful things, and then if it survived to your 4th upkeep, you lost.
Yeah,
but it just like forced the choice. I know this doesn't make you lose or whatever, but I think the way that this card is templated is cool.
Yeah,
I see more like it in the future.
I do too. I think that it's a neat design space, and it potentially does some crazy stuff. So we'll see. We'll see how it works out, man. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm sure it will get play because it's exciting and kind of has an incentive to be played. And yeah, those are all good things.